Hello everybody, and welcome to this relatively short video about writing a literature review. And this is aimed at undergraduate students in the School of Textiles and Design. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been asked for help with writing a literature review. So rather than trying to organise a session that lots of people can't turn up to, I thought it might be better if I just give out this little video about writing a literature review. My name's Jamie and I'm the library manager, and that's my email address on the page right now. So if you want to get in touch after this little session and have a chat about your literature review, I can even have a quick glance over and maybe give you some pointers, then by all means feel free to get in touch. Literature reviews are quite difficult to teach about because it's not one size fits all. I think a lot of students come along to these sessions hoping that I'll just tell them how to do it and then they go off and do it. Unfortunately, there's a little bit more work on the part of the student for writing a good literature review. Anyway, let's crack on and hopefully you'll be able to pick up some really good hints and tips from this and write a really great literature review. Okay, so you do a literature review as part of research, but what exactly is research? What do we mean by research? Well, here's a definition. A disciplined inquiry that involves studying something in a planned manner and reporting it so that other inquirers can potentially replicate the process if they choose. Basically, that means it's an inquiry into something that's done in a very planned manner, a very laid out manner, logical, and your reporting is about giving other people who might want to do similar research the tools that they would need to repeat your research, to test your theories and so on. And there, look, I've got my little reference in. So remember, even your literature review has to be referenced really well. Okay. All research papers really have something called an abstract, which is like a synopsis or a brief description about what is going to be talked about in your research paper. You introduce the subject with an introduction, then it's your literature review, a presentation of your findings from your research, a bit of analysis of your findings, any limitations that you found, so you might be limited by time, by equipment, by the number of people that you can do your study with, and that kind of thing. Recommendations for further study, a conclusion, and of course don't forget your reference list at the end. Okay. And the main purpose, what you're trying to achieve with a literature review, is quite simply telling your reader what work has already been done and what established knowledge and ideas are already out there in your topic. You're just relaying the information that's already out there, and that's so that your reader gets a really good idea of what other research has been done. It's also a chance for you to grow your knowledge in that area. It's a chance for you to take a closer look at how research has been carried out, and this is the bit that a lot of people miss. You're not just there to report the conclusions, you're actually looking at how people got to their conclusions. And that process of coming to a conclusion is what we call methodologies. And what you're looking for is, was there common methodologies? Did different researchers use different ways of finding out their data? It's also a chance for you to show where your research fits into the existing research. So if you think of all research in a particular subject like a brick wall, and there's lots of bricks in this wall, but there's a gap there, there's a gap where you will put your research. That's your brick that you're putting into the wall. A good literature review would also cover the problems that previous researchers have faced, and it establishes the known facts, and it tells your reader how people got to their conclusions. Okay. A literature review is a critical evaluation of the research that has been conducted on a particular topic, and the crucial word there is critical. Critical evaluation. You're not just there to report on it, you're there to look at it and say whether it's good or bad or rubbish or fantastic bit of research or trustworthy or up to date, or, so make sure you put on your critical head. Further than that though, it's about an evaluation of how those documents, how all those bits of research relate to each other and to your research. You're not just reporting on this person said this, and this person said that, and this person said this, and this person said that. You've got to try and relate the documents together in some way. I'll talk to you in a wee minute about that. A literature review is laborious. There's a lot of reading involved. There's a lot of writing involved and piecing things together. It's almost like try and get into the mindset of a detective piecing together a case. That's what you're kind of trying to do. You're trying to look at all the clues and piece together to come up with some kind of story. But you know what? A literature review is absolutely essential to successful research, and it's something that we need to do. So hopefully after this video you'll have a better idea how to do it really well. A literature review is definitely not a list of sources. Some people would try and do what we call an annotated bibliography, where they just list the sources and then tell the reader a little bit about them. That's superficial, that's not quite what we're after. It's not an essay reporting what other people have said, and it's also not a chance for you just to go on and on and on about the importance of your research. I read one literature review 2 or 3 years ago that was basically this person saying why they were so important, why their research was so important. No, it's a critical evaluation of what other people have done. The literature review process. So here's the process that you should go through, right? First of all, at the top here, you select the topic that you want to discuss. Then you go away and you search around as much as you can for the literature. And you select the papers or the books or the pieces of information that are the most relevant to your research topic. Then you've got to kind of analyse and interpret, and that's where you piece them together like the detective. And then you've got to start writing the review. Okay, that's where you start writing up. And quite often people write a first draft, and then it takes a second draft and a third draft, and then you start to see how all the things connect up together. Okay, now one little problem with this is quite often people will select the topic that they want to do, and then they'll go and search for stuff, and actually they can't find anything on that topic. That's happened quite a lot this year. So my suggestion to you is don't pick a topic until you've had a quick look on the databases and on Discovery and Google Scholar and seen what's already out there. Because the last thing you want is to pick a topic where there's no literature. You need to have something that you can talk about in your literature review. Okay, so that's the process you go through. So let's look at the first step, which is selecting your topic. Please have a clear research question. Every time I speak to students, the first thing I say to them is, what is your research question? And you know what? They go and they look through their folders and they've got it written down somewhere, but they have this vague idea of what it's about. No, this will not work unless you've got a really clear idea of what you are trying to find out. So have a clear idea of your research question. Have it visible all the time. So have it pinned to your screen or have it in your notes somewhere that's handy so that you don't have to keep looking for it and trying to recall it and stuff like that. And that way you'll keep to the point. You'll stay on track and you'll keep to the point. Fab. Now, quite often your research question, it might be filled with lots of different topics that you need to discover. So write down a list of the possible topics that you'll need to explore, and that'll break it up into nice, easy chunks. Then search for the stuff. So you've decided on the topic, then search for the stuff that you want. Where are you going to search? Where do you go? Well, you've got to look at academic journals, books, conference proceedings, government pamphlets, theses, dissertations, and all that kind of stuff. Where do you find them? Well, go to Discovery. Discovery is your best friend in this process. Go to Discovery. If you're not sure, go to www.hw.ac.uk/is. Click on the link for Discovery. It's Find Resources and then click on the link for Discovery. And put your search in. Make sure you sign in the top right hand corner using your Heriot-Watt username and password. And then have a good search through, and don't give up after the first couple of searches. Keep going. Reformulate your search till you find the things that you want. You've got a general search option there, but if you look at the top of Discovery, you'll see that there's databases and there's journals A to Z. So you can actually look up journal titles from an A to Z. And you know what? If you're struggling, then you've got a subject librarian who is paid to be there to help you with these kind of things. And the good news is your subject librarian is me. and I'm happy to help you at any time. Just email me and make an appointment, or even just call into the library and ask one of my team, who will be very happy to help you in the first instance. If they can't find what you're looking for, then they'll pass you on to me. So do just come into the library and ask for the help. Do not be shy. We're not doing you a favour. It's what we get paid for. That's what your fees go towards. So please make sure and come and use us. There's also something called Google Scholar, which is a really cool thing. It gives you access to it doesn't give you access, but it will show you all the papers on a particular subject. So look at Google Scholar. You won't get access to everything on Google Scholar, but if you're logged into a Heriot-Watt machine, you'll see that you've got access to a lot more stuff because it's recognising you as a Heriot-Watt person. Anyway, that's fab. Look at those areas there and see what you can find. Also, when you've got a paper in front of you, so you get this research article in front of you, look at the end, because at the end of it they'll have their reference list, and you'll be able to see what that researcher has read, and that'll give you little clues as to where to go next and find other papers. A literature review should mostly rely on just primary sources. What on earth is a primary source and a secondary source? And this is something that really can confuse people. The easiest way of explaining it is a primary source is a research report that's been written by a person who actually did the work. They've developed the theory, or they conducted the investigation, or they actually did the experiments that they're talking about. That's primary research. Secondary research is descriptions of research that's been prepared by someone else. So secondary. So that's like, normally you'd find that in books where people have described the work of other people and taken their conclusions. So that's how secondary and primary works. Most of your stuff's going to rely on primary, but don't worry about using secondary sources. They are actually valid as well. Okay. Now, when you're selecting your papers, what you need to do is you need to skim read. Don't spend time reading page after page of a journal article only to get to the end and find out that it's not the thing that you wanted. It's got no help to you. It's been no help to you at all. So while scanning through the literature, please, first of all, manage all of your data properly. Keep a clear list of everything that you've read. Record the author, the title, and summarise key ideas that they discuss. And do that on separate bits of paper and build yourself up a little file of all the stuff that you've read. That will make life so much easier in the long run, because from that little summary and those little things, you'll be able to spot if there's for example, an author who's written lots and lots of papers on a particular subject. You'll be able to say that they're one of the main contributors. When you summarise the key ideas as well, you'll be able to start to see, well, that paper agrees with that paper, so I can stick them together when it starts to piece this all up. Please do this because it'll help you so much in the long run. It'll help you stay organised, and it'll help you stay on track. And you won't have to go back through and look at stuff and, oh, I can't remember exactly what that author said, so you've got to then go and find the paper again. Rather than that, just have this little file where you've summarised all the ideas, and it's so much more helpful. So do that, please. Then, when we start to map things together, you have to look at how these papers relate to each other. What are the similarities? What are the differences? Okay, here's an example right on the screen here. We've got paper A, paper B, book C, and paper D. Okay, now we can see that paper D has a line going to paper A, an arrow. That's because paper D completely agrees with what is said in paper A. So those two papers have come to the same conclusions. But what's interesting about that is that paper D, the guys in paper D, actually used a completely different methodology. They used a completely different way of getting to their conclusions, yet they still ended up with the same conclusion as paper A. So there's a relationship there. Okay, so you put them together. You might want to talk about them together. Or you might want to say paper A says this, but they found out that by doing it this way. Whereas paper D says this, and they found it out by doing it this way. It's interesting, good point to note, that paper D and paper A had exactly the same conclusions. But then it gets a little bit more complicated because paper A and book C have completely different conclusions. And book C used the same methodology as paper A. Oh, that's interesting. So they used the same methodology, but they had a completely different conclusion. So what's happened there? How can the person who wrote book C use the same method but come up with a completely different answer? Oh, that's interesting. You should put that in your literature review. And you know what? Paper B actually completely disagrees with paper D. And if paper B completely disagrees with paper D, it completely disagrees with paper A. But paper B also does not agree with book C. They used a completely different methodology, paper B, and they came up to completely different results. Isn't that interesting? So there's another thing for us to talk about. And you see what I'm doing? You start to build up how these papers relate to each other. And that's why this is not an essay. This is about looking at the research and discussing how it all ties up or doesn't tie up, who all agrees with each other, who's standing on their own. Now, what would you say about paper B? It's used a completely different methodology and it's come to completely different conclusions. But there's no other sources that back up paper B. So what does that tell you about paper B's conclusions? If nobody else agrees with that, what does that tell you? Does it mean that it's standing there on its own? Does it mean it's less valid? You've got to remember that when Einstein came up with his theory of relativity and he published it in a paper, nobody agreed with it. Nobody believed it could be real. Nobody actually believed it. Nobody agreed with it. There were no other papers that backed it up. And yet Einstein's theory of relativity is still with us today. So just because a paper doesn't have anybody else backing it up doesn't make it any less valid. Doesn't make it great, doesn't make it fantastic, but you have to start piecing these things together and talking about how the guys found out what they found out, what their conclusions were, and whether they agree with each other. Okay? This is about analysis and interpretation. So you've got to analyse the literature, take a critical stance. Imagine that you are the person marking the literature. You're marking it, so you're being critical, you're looking at how they did things, and you're asking yourself, is that the best way that they could have found that out? A good example, a lot of you have been doing quantitative data where you've been surveying people and measuring people, and you've only been able to get samples of maybe 20 to 30. Now that's good because you've got 20 to 30 people, and in the case of an undergraduate dissertation, that's a really good sample. But what if there was a study out there that had 30,000 people? Does that give that study any more weight? Well, it might do. You might want to argue that. So key things to look out for also as well is the currency of the work. That means, is it up to date? When was that bit of research done? Was it done in the 1980s? Or was it done in 2017? You're looking for conflicts in methodology. Why have they done things differently? Was that the best way to do it? Who had the better option? And does the work stand on its own, or is it supported by work of others? Yeah, I've covered that a wee bit. So the idea is that you describe the relationship of each study to other research studies, you identify the data sources used by other researchers, and you discuss and resolve the conflicts amongst them. And also the other point of a literature review is to look at where are there big gaps in the research. So if a lot of you are looking at sustainability, there's been a whole load of stuff done about sustainable materials and that kind of thing, but what about waterless dyeing? There doesn't seem to be a lot of research out there that uses waterless dyeing. It's a fairly new thing, there maybe hasn't been a chance to do much research into it, but that's obviously a big gap in the wall. And then we come to the writing up, which is the tricky part, because this is where you're piecing it all together. And you know what? What you write first time, that's not going to be the end of the story. That's you starting to piece it together. So you've got to give yourself plenty of time, and you've got to present your findings. It has to be understood by your intended audience. Who's going to read this? Well, let's pretend that you're going to give it to me to read. Okay? I am not the world's expert in any subject to do with fashion or textiles or sustainability or ethics. So you have to make sure that I would be able to understand it, right? Don't assume that Bruce or Britta or whoever your supervisor is actually going to understand everything about it. Don't make any assumptions. Explain everything clearly. Tell them the story of the literature. Make it interesting. Make it good. Make it something that they'll want to read, not something that they have to plough through. Give them the facts. Be passionate about it. If you get interested in the subject and actually have a bit of a passion for this, then let that show through the page, okay? Also, you've got to try and convince them that your research will be an important addition to the research that's already out there. Getting started, you start with an introduction, of course. Define your research problem again, even though you've said it already in your big introduction to the dissertation. Define the research problem again at the top of the page. Define the key terms. So if you're looking at thermotrophic scars, then please explain what thermotrophic scars are. It doesn't have to be too in-depth, just a rough explanation would be good. And a very brief overview about what you've found in the literature. So it might be an idea that you leave the introduction to the last bit, because you're going to have to give a very brief overview of the literature. This is not the bit where you go into so-and-so said this and so-and-so said that. This is the bit where you say, there has been lots of papers published on this subject from 1985 to 2017. Those kind of very broad statements that you're making. Then you've got the main body of your text, and this is where you do the whole analysis and bringing bits and pieces together. Now, use an organisational scheme. Pick one that is appropriate for you. Here's a couple of examples. You could do it in topical order. So if your research question has lots of different topics, do it topic by topic and pick the topic and then say who said what about that topic. Okay? You could do it in chronological order. So you could say, okay, the research started in 1985 and it's been built upon each year since then. So-and-so did this in 92, so-and-so did this in 96. Beware though, that when you do it in chronological order, it can just start to sound like an essay or like a report of who said what and when. And that's not what you're aiming for here. So chronological order might work for you, but I would be careful with it. Another way is to look at problem, cause, solution. So you look at what the problems were, what the research problem was, and then you look at how people went to try and find out what was causing the problem, and then how they solved it. Okay? So you take it problem by problem. So in a research paper, a writer might mention that there was maybe like 3 or 4 problems, and then they talk about what the cause of the problem was, and then they talk about how they solved it. Try and group them together like that. You can do comparison and contrast. So you can say, so-and-so, McIntyre said this, and Sue Thomas said this, and they're roughly in agreement. But in contrast to that, Jamie McIntyre has said this. And so what you're doing is you're grouping the papers together, those who agree with each other on a topic and those who disagree in the next paragraph. Specific to general order and general to specific. So you start off talking about very specific things and you branch out to more general stuff, or you talk about very overarching things and then work your way down to more specific problems. For most of you, I think the best thing to do is take it in topical order. That seems to be the most logical way from what I've seen of your work and the work of people in the past. That seems to be the most logical way of tackling it. But it's up to you. Choose one organisational scheme and try and stick to it. If you don't choose an organisational scheme, what happens is things get very confused. They get muddled up. You start talking about one thing over here, and then you start talking about another thing, and then you go back to the first topic and stuff. So try and group things together in terms of some kind of organisational scheme. Try and group your research studies and other types of literature together according to things that they have in common, commonalities. It might be the way they found stuff out. It might be that they used a similar sample of people. It might be that they used the same experiments. It might be that they came to similar conclusions. So group things together like that. Thinking about how they've approached it. Did they use qualitative data or did they use quantitative data? So an example of a qualitative research would be somebody who uses a lot of surveys and it's about opinions and social trends and that kind of thing. That's a very difficult thing to quantify, to put a number next to. Whereas somebody who's done experiments or done a lot of measurements and has gathered up a lot of numerical data, they would have been taking a quantitative approach. So try and group things together that way as well. People who have similar or conflicting conclusions, that's another way of relating the journals. Give as much or as little detail. Oh yeah, one of the questions I get asked loads, how much should I talk about each paper in my literature review? And the answer to that is, how long is a piece of string? It's really dependent upon how important that work is to your research question. So if you find something that's not really got that much relevance to what you're wanting to talk about, don't spend ages talking about it. That's a waste of time. And your lecturer's going to have to read through a whole load of stuff that's actually not relevant. So if something is really relevant and they've done a lot of work that relates to your research question, then obviously concentrate on it. Spend a lot of time on it. And the one thing to do, guys, is please start your paragraphs with clear umbrella sentences. Give your reader a really clear idea about what you're going to talk about in that paragraph. Right? Each paragraph should have a kind of introductory sentence to say, this is what I'm going to talk about. All too often what happens is people, they just run from one topic to the next. And really what your lecturers are looking for is a bit of a guidance about what you're going to talk about. So you'd say, you wouldn't write this paragraph is about, of course, but you would write words to the effect of introducing the topic and then say the main points that you're going to make about it. So, for example, you would say, one of the most important things about waterless dyeing is X, Y, and Z. Several researchers have looked at this and have come to the conclusion that X, Y, and Z. Okay? And then writing up your conclusion. In your conclusion, all you're going to do is summarise the main contributions to the topic. Not going into too much detail again. You're coming out of it, you're trying to conclude, and you're just looking at the main contributions. Overall evaluation of the state of the literature, where you would try and mention any major gaps, any major flaws, any places where there's an inconsistency in the conclusions that are made, or the methodologies. And then your final sentences should be about where your research fits into the overall picture. The final couple of sentences should be that. That's what we call the so what part. So you've done all this literature review, now what? What's going to happen with your research? Some things to consider. Check the evidence of the claims in the literature. Okay, so when you're reading a research paper and they come up with a conclusion, check the evidence. Have a look at the evidence. Does it make sense to you? Okay, I know you're not really all academics, you're still undergrads, but does it make sense to you? Is the evidence relevant? Is it reliable? Is it current? Have they made any assumptions anywhere? Because a lot of time researchers do make little assumptions. They don't mean to, but they do. And so you've got to pick them up on that because your critical head is on. And remember to reference your literature review. Please, guys, I know that you're discussing complicated things, but use simple sentences. Avoid any errors of grammar and punctuation. Use short sentences. If your sentences go over 2 lines, then think about adding some punctuation in there, because your lecturer's got to read this, and if you've got lines and lines and lines of stuff, what happens actually is people's heads are so full of great information and they can't wait to get it down on the page, and it becomes like a stream of consciousness. So they're basically throwing up on the page. So please try and write in short, clear sentences and use your own language. Use your own language. You don't have to write complicated. My mantra is always write to express, not to impress. You're just writing to express things, okay? Common mistakes that people make. The review has no organisation structure, so they didn't pick to do it by topic. They didn't pick to do it on papers that agree with each other or disagree with each other and stuff like that. So make sure you choose an organisation structure and you make a little plan of what you want to say. Yeah, quite often people are reviewing lots and lots of literature, and their literature reviews up to 4,000, 5,000 words long. But actually, some of the stuff in there, it doesn't relate to the topic. So don't include stuff that doesn't relate to the topic. Sometimes people's reviews, they read like a series of disjointed summaries of what's been done before, and that's not what we're after either. That's just an essay. And also, I've seen people who have done things like, they've looked at something and they've not included any of the most up to date research. They found the things that they want to find and that agree with what they want to say, and they've just been sort of what we call cherry picking them. So you've got to go for the most up to date research, even if it disagrees with your point. That's okay. Common questions that I get asked: how long should a literature review be? Should it be long or should it be short? My answer is, how long is a piece of string? For undergraduates, I think the general guidance is anywhere between 2,500 to 5,000 words. But again, it depends on how much literature is out there, how much you can talk about it. You can't make stuff up for a literature review. So if there's not a lot out there, you can't really write a lot. More importantly, a lot of people sort of say to me, how many sources should I use? And for people who are doing shorter dissertations, like 4,000, I think the general guidance from the school is try and use at least 10 sources of info, at least 10 sources as part of your literature review. But if you're going on to master's study or doing a PhD, of course, it's as many as it takes. You've got to do a thorough literature review for those levels of study. So make sure you are quite thorough with that. Okay. Quick recap then before we finish. What is a literature review? It's a critical evaluation, and it's more than just a critical evaluation of all the research. It's also looking at how all the bits of research relate to each other. What's the first stage of the literature review cycle? That's selecting a good topic. Have a wee look on Discovery and Google Scholar to see if there's plenty of stuff out there that covers your topic. Maybe you need to refine your topic a little bit so that you've got enough stuff out there, enough research to back you up. And list 2 places where you can find data for the literature review. Well, those 2 places I mentioned were Discovery and Google, and that's where you go and you do your literature review work. And if you're struggling, then you get in touch with your subject librarian, which for textiles is me. So please feel free to get in touch. That's my email address, j.h.mcintyre@hw.ac.uk. Guys, I really hope that's been helpful. I'm sorry that the video is so long, but there's a lot to cover in it. I hope you've got something out of it. All the best, and please don't hesitate to get in touch. Okay, thanks for listening, and bye for now.